Remove the child from the room, now. That's what Melora Reeve, president of the Crestlock Vale HOA, said as she stood in front of the folding table, her hands clasped in that smug way she always held them, like she was already signing the verdict. Her eyes barely flicked toward my son, Bram, who stood quietly tracing the pattern of his tactile ring, headphones snug over his ears. He's not on the homeowner deed. This is a board proceeding, not a daycare. Before I could move, she reached forward and grabbed Bram's wrist. She shouldn't have touched him. That's when the municipal security officer, stationed near the double doors, surged forward like a coiled spring. His shoulder hit her square in the ribs. Chairs scattered. A clipboard flew. Bram screamed, a sound I've only ever heard during medical emergencies. And that's the exact second I knew I wasn't walking out of here quietly, because the truth is, I don't have to. You see, this room, the hearing, chamber inside Pinecrest Community Hall, isn't just where Melora thought she'd humiliate us. It's where she exposed the board to federal liability in front of a city officer and 3 witnesses. And I'm the last man she should have done that to. I'm Dr. Calder Wynn, pediatric behavioral neuroscientist. I don't argue on Facebook. I file structured complaints with HUD and copy my contacts at the state compliance office. My late wife used to say, I talk like a deposition transcript. I took that as a compliment. If you're watching this and thinking that can't happen, trust me, it just did. And if you're raising a child with autism or dealing with an HOA that thinks they're untouchable, you need to subscribe now, because this isn't just my story. This is a roadmap. Let me tell you why I built that path in the first place. It wasn't for decoration. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a sensory regulation trail. Mirror tiles set in a winding curve of soft gravel. So, Bram could walk barefoot before school, or when his words got stuck and his breathing turned shallow. He doesn't speak, but that path, that was his voice. I laid every tile myself. I didn't ask the board's permission because I didn't need to. Our lot is private, and under the Fair Housing Act, I'm legally entitled to make reasonable modifications for a disability. Bram has a legal diagnosis, and I submitted the paperwork with medical letters to Melora the day after her first warning letter. But she didn't care about Bram's therapist or his regulation needs. She cared about aesthetic harmony. She said the path broke terrain symmetry. And I've learned something about people like Melora Reeve. They don't want power. They want proof that they can hurt you and walk away clean. She's been itching to make an example out of someone since the day her cement urn got moved 3 inches in a windstorm. Only she picked the wrong house, the wrong child, the wrong father. Because I didn't just build that sensory path for Bram. I built it to replace the therapy room we lost when his mother, Marin, died. Cancer, mid-pandemic. We sold our old home to afford Crestlock's quiet streets and clean air. Marin loved this place from the moment we drove in. She said it looked like a neighborhood painted by calm. So, when Melora taped that violation notice to my door, calling Bram's path an unauthorized landscape deviation, she didn't just attack policy. She desecrated memory. I filed the first accommodation request 2 hours after receiving her notice. The second request was submitted via certified mail with a copy sent to the State Housing Authority. The third came the morning of the hearing, just before she grabbed Bram in front of a city security officer. That was her mistake. She thought I'd fold. She thought a grieving father with a quiet son wouldn't know his rights. She thought no one would see. She was wrong. She doesn't know about the state filings her board forgot to renew. She doesn't know that a man named Stanton Creel, HOA secretary, is quietly watching every illegal order she gives, and that he's already printed the document that will sink her. She doesn't know I've filed a HUD complaint with attached photos, timestamps, and a trauma statement, but she will. Because when someone grabs your child, there's no HOA rule that can protect them from what comes next. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear from every parent who's had to defend their child's dignity from people like her. The tiles were still damp with last night's fog when I stepped onto the path the next morning. Bram had already started his routine, barefoot, as always, following the curve of mirror shards set in resin. Each step shimmered under the early light. His shoulders were calm, his rhythm steady. That's when I noticed the new sign. It wasn't taped like the last notice. This one had been drilled into a wooden stake and driven into the soil right beside the first curve of the path. Unapproved landscape modification, violation 7.6c. Remove within 72 hours or fines will accrue. It had the HOA letterhead, Crestlock Vale's branding, and at the bottom, in neat black font, issued by President Melora Reeve. I didn't pull the stake out. Not yet. Bram had already looked at it. I saw the break in his steps, an almost imperceptible twitch in his shoulders as his eyes passed over the sign. But he didn't pause. He adjusted. He kept walking. That's when I knew we didn't have much time. Crestlock Vale prides itself on its visual unity. Every house in soft clay tones, every roof sloped just so, trees planted on a grid, no flags, no fountains, no exceptions. I'd respected all of it, except the path. Because that was the line between conformity and survival, between a meltdown and a manageable morning. The first time I got a violation notice was 2 weeks after the path was installed. Bram had just begun using it daily without resistance. It had taken 2 months of trial and error to find the right textures, the right spacing. The mirrors were his favorite. He'd stop and stare into them, like he could see something no one else could. The violation was phrased like a courtesy. We understand there may be special circumstances. Please file for review with our Architectural Oversight Committee. So I did. I attached letters from Bram's therapist, Marin's former developmental pediatrician, and an early intervention specialist from the state. I explained sensory regulation in clinical language. I gave them the law, FHA Section 804F, verse 3b, reasonable accommodations, not a luxury, a necessity. Melora sent me a denial 3 days later. No appeal, no discussion. The next board meeting included a motion to increase fines for non-conforming surface treatments. She wasn't trying to regulate. She was trying to erase. Crestlock Vale isn't unique in that way. I've consulted for 37 HOA communities in my career. I've seen them weaponize silence, paper trails, and bylaws that haven't been updated since the 90s. They don't need to win in court. They just need to outlast you emotionally. But she hadn't counted on Bram, because Bram doesn't respond to threats. He doesn't argue. He doesn't retreat. When something matters to him, he finds a way to move through it, quietly, repeatedly, until the world shifts around him. I watched him pass the stake again. His fingers grazed the mirror next to it, gently, like brushing the edge of a memory. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. But I did. Inside the house, I opened the binder I'd kept since Marin passed. Medical notes, schedule logs, therapy feedback. All of it neatly cataloged, one parent's attempt to build continuity in a world that refuses to understand children like Bram. I found the document I needed, the sensory integration report signed off by Dr. Halverson 6 months ago. The same one I'd already sent Melora. I printed another copy, highlighted the diagnosis. Then I opened my email and attached it again. Subject line, reasonable accommodation, resubmission, urgent compliance request. But I knew what would happen next. She'd ignore it. She'd escalate. She'd drag us into another hearing, her arena, her rules. She didn't know I'd already taken steps outside her reach. HUD had logged my original complaint. They'd assigned a case number. I'd sent photographs of the sign, the path, Bram walking it with his therapist. I hadn't made it personal, not yet, until yesterday. Now it was personal, because I can forgive bureaucracy. I can even tolerate cruelty masquerading as policy. But the second someone lays hands on my child, that's when procedure ends, and litigation begins. I looked out the window again. Bram was still walking. His steps hadn't changed. The sign still stood. But I could feel it, the shift, the weight moving in my direction. Melora didn't know it yet, but she'd already lost. She just hadn't felt it break beneath her feet. Stanton Creel stood 3 rows back during the hearing, just far enough to keep himself out of the direct crossfire, just close enough to see everything. He wore the same beige windbreaker he always did. HOA badge clipped to the zipper, expression unreadable beneath thick wire-rimmed glasses. When Melora grabbed Bram's wrist, he didn't move, not visibly. But I saw his hand tighten on the folder in his lap. Not rage, not shock. Something else. Recognition. It wasn't the first time he'd seen her cross a line. Later, as the commotion cleared and the officer escorted Melora into the hallway for questioning, Stanton remained seated. The rest of the board was scattered, some standing, others checking their phones, a few pretending not to notice what had just happened. But Stanton just sat there, hands folded over that folder like it was something fragile or dangerous. We didn't speak that day, but 2 days later, he showed up. It was dusk. I'd just finished helping Bram with his bedtime walk, 2 laps around the path, 3 minutes in the swing, then 5 with the weighted blanket. He was upstairs now, lights low, a soft white noise track humming beneath the closed door. I opened the front door without checking who it was. Stanton stood on the porch, holding the same folder. "I'm off the clock," he said. "This isn't official." I didn't invite him in. I didn't have to. He stepped inside and glanced toward the backyard, where the mirrored tiles reflected faint silver under the porch light. "I used to work for the State Planning Commission," he said quietly. "Before I retired, before my wife got sick." He sat down without asking, opened the folder. Inside were 3 documents, 2 copies of HOA renewal filings and 1 sheet that wasn't stamped. "That's the one that's missing," he said, tapping the unstamped page. It took me a moment to recognize the form: Annual Compliance Certification, Accessibility and Legal Standing, Form 14202F. Required for HOAs in this state to maintain enforcement authority under residential development law. Their last certified version was 18 months ago, he continued. They forgot to refile, or chose not to. That means their fines are invalid. So are any architectural enforcement actions tied to that filing. I didn't speak. I just looked at him, waited. "I didn't come here to pick a side," he added, but his voice cracked on the word side. "But I've been watching her push people around for 4 years, quietly, strategically. She runs the board like it's a monarchy." He looked down at the floor. "And I saw what she did to your son." There it was, the crack in the dam. "I should have said something," he muttered. "I should have stepped in. But I froze, and I've been doing that for a long time." I didn't forgive him in that moment, but I understood. "Why now?" I asked. Stanton exhaled through his nose, then opened his wallet and pulled out a photo. A teenage girl, oxygen tubes beneath her nose, smiling despite it. My daughter, Naomi. She was born with pulmonary dysplasia, spent more time in hospitals than schools. The HOA we used to live under threatened us over her wheelchair ramp. He shook his head slowly, like someone trying to forget the taste of something rotten. "We moved here to escape that. I joined the board to make sure it never happened again. And then, I watched her become the same thing." He handed me the form, the one without the stamp. "They're going to try to bury this," he said. "She'll claim it's a clerical delay, maybe even rush a backdate, but the filing system timestamps everything. If you report it now, they can't undo it fast." "Enough." He stood. "You don't owe me anything. I just wanted you to have it before I lose the nerve." As he stepped off the porch, I called after him. "Why not turn her in yourself?" He paused at the bottom of the steps, looked back. "Because she dragged my daughter's name through the mud. She still has friends on the board, people who know how to make life hard in ways that don't leave fingerprints." I nodded once. He disappeared down the path, his beige coat swallowed by dusk. Inside, I placed the form next to Bram's therapy log. We were done playing defense. Now, we had the first thread. And I knew exactly how to pull. The next morning, the path was gone. Not the one Bram walked. His mirror tiles were still intact, still glinting under the overcast sky. But the gravel extension I'd added behind the rose bushes, where he sometimes circled when he was overstimulated, stripped. The soil was raw, uneven, as if someone had clawed it up in the night. There was no warning, no notice, just a pink plastic flag planted where the trail used to curve. Unsafe material removal, HOA compliance action completed. I stood there, fists clenched, jaw locked. Bram came out the door behind me, clutching his weighted ring like always. He looked down at the churned soil. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He turned, walked back inside, and didn't finish his circuit. I didn't follow him. Instead, I took photos. High-res, time-stamped. I captured the flag, the tire marks near the gate, the splintered edge of the retaining beam they had knocked loose. Then I walked the perimeter of my fence line. They'd come through the side utility easement. Someone on the board had authorized a silent, off-record entry. The moment I stepped back into the house, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered on instinct. Mr. Wynn, this is Board Vice President Harold Clemens. We've received reports that your unauthorized landscape feature was causing drainage, runoff into the neighbor's yard. Last night's weather posed an urgent liability risk. The board deemed it necessary to act immediately under Provision 3.9E, Emergency Terrain Correction. He paused, like he expected me to thank him. You entered private property and altered a medically necessary therapeutic structure without notice, I said. We acted in the interest of community safety. Your authority expired 18 months ago. A pause. We believe that's been resolved. I'm filing an emergency injunction today. Another pause. This conversation is being recorded, Mr. Wynn. It is now. He hung up. I looked toward the stairs. Bram hadn't come back down. That was the breaking point. I went to the garage, pulled down the plastic storage bin labeled Case, HUD, Civil, and opened the file I hadn't touched in 3 years. The one from when a district charter school refused Bram's therapy accommodations until we filed. Inside, down was every form, every signature, every affidavit template. It took me an hour to finish the packet. That same afternoon, I drove to the county records office and submitted the HUD complaint update. I attached Stanton's unfiled form, 14-2-2-SF. I attached the timestamps from the missing renewal date. I added photos of the destroyed trail section, a medical note from Bram's occupational therapist, and a witness statement signed by Dr. Halverson. Before leaving, I asked to speak with someone from the accessibility compliance team. A woman named Yvonne met me at the desk. She was polite but cautious. I explained the situation. Her brow furrowed when I mentioned Crestlock Vale. We've had a few flags from that area, she said, but nothing this specific. She took the folder from me, flipped through it, and stopped at the destruction photo. This is the therapy path? I nodded. She tapped her pen against the image, then looked up. This isn't just a zoning issue. This may rise to hostile environment discrimination, especially with the documented denial of accommodation. Then she leaned in slightly. If your HOA's filing lapsed and they took action after losing that legal standing, they have exposed themselves to real liability. And if we confirm that trail was a prescribed accommodation, she didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need her to. I left with a case number, a formal intake receipt, and a quiet storm building in my chest. That evening, I sat on the back porch while Bram lay under his weighted blanket, silent. The lights from the path flickered on one by one, solar-powered, faint but steady. A few mirrored tiles still caught the sky, but the curve was broken. The rhythm was gone, and all I could think about was the sound he'd made when Melora touched him. A sound like something tearing. This wasn't about bylaws anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about harm, visible, intentional, documented. And I knew exactly who to make answer for it. I didn't sleep that night, not in any real way. I paced the house like I used to during the NICU nights, phone in one hand, legal pad in the other, documenting every timestamp, replaying every memory. The image of Bram walking that broken path kept flashing in my head, one side smooth and polished, the other stripped and raw. By morning, I had my list. Every action the HOA had taken since the missed compliance renewal, every warning letter, every fine, every denial, all of it built on a foundation that legally no longer existed. But I needed confirmation, something irrefutable. That's when I called Aaron Toll. We'd worked together on a state advisory panel 5 years ago. Aaron specialized in real estate law and had transitioned into compliance auditing for residential associations. If anyone could interpret the filing discrepancy, it was her. She answered on the second ring. "You don't call unless something's bleeding," she said. I gave her the outline, fast, clinical, detached. She asked for the time-stamped form. I sent the scan from Stanton. Then I waited. It took her 12 minutes to call back. "You weren't exaggerating," she said. "They're dead in the water. They'll claim it was an administrative delay. They can't. You can't operate under enforcement authority once the annual certification lapses. It's automatic suspension. Doesn't matter if they intended to renew later. They had to have that form filed by March 1st. Their grace window was 60 days. After that, all enforcement actions are void unless retroactively granted by the Oversight Committee, which, according to the database, they never requested. Meaning? Meaning every letter they sent you was just paper, no teeth, no legal standing. If they touched your property, they did. Her voice hardened. Then they've exposed the board to personal liability, not just the HOA. You can go. Beyond HUD. You can go to civil court. I didn't answer right away. My throat had tightened unexpectedly. Calder, I know this isn't just legal for you, she said, quieter now. I remember when Marin passed. I remember what you built for Bram. You always said the structure was what kept him centered. It still is, she exhaled. Then you need to act while the evidence is fresh. File a temporary protective order. Force a stop on any further HOA action until HUD concludes their investigation. I'll email you the templates. Thank you. No need. Just finish this. When the call ended, I stared at the last note I'd scrawled on my pad. Proof removes debate. Melora had built her power on silence, on wearing people down, not winning clean. But she'd missed the deadline that gave her teeth. And in her arrogance, she kept biting. I didn't need to convince anyone anymore. I just needed to trigger the system that was already built to stop people, like her. That afternoon, I walked into the county records office again. Different desk, different clerk. This time, I brought Aaron's signed audit report. I attached the certified date stamp of the missing compliance renewal. I filed for an emergency protective injunction under Residential Disability Modification Protection Law, citing FHA precedent and medical necessity. The clerk handed me a case folder and raised an eyebrow when she saw the HOA name. You're the second one from Crestlock this month, she said. I paused. Really? She nodded. Different issue, but same board president. It's always the same names. Back home, I laid the injunction copy on the kitchen table and stood over it. I wasn't a man who liked escalation. My work required calm, clarity. I'd built a career around de-escalating pediatric crises, helping families find a stable center in the chaos. But sometimes escalation isn't a choice. Sometimes it's the only language certain people understand. When Bram came downstairs that evening, he didn't ask to go outside. He didn't reach for his tactile ring. He sat on the floor beside the dining table and began organizing his flashcards in a line. Weather patterns, trees, seasons, order, in his own language. I knelt beside him, watched in silence. The tiles still caught the sky outside, but soon they'd reflect something else. Accountability. The hearing notice came by courier the next morning, hand-delivered, embossed with the HOA seal, and stamped with false urgency. They wanted a special compliance session in 72 hours to determine the status of contested modifications and the homeowner's willful disregard for emergency HOA directives. I read it twice. It wasn't a meeting. It was a last-ditch ambush disguised as procedure. Melora was cornered, and this was her way of clawing back control, through process, through pretense. She was trying to rush a verdict before outside hands could intervene, before HUD's investigation matured, before the court clerk could sign off on my injunction. She was playing for time, but so was I. I left the envelope unopened on the kitchen counter, then went upstairs to Bram's room. He was curled under the weighted blanket, watching the shadows ripple across the ceiling. I sat beside him and waited. After a while, he reached for my hand. That's what gave me the push I needed. I drove straight to the clinic where Dr. Halverson worked and requested an emergency session note, one that detailed Bram's current regression due to environmental disruption. I watched Halverson's expression tighten as she read the photos of the torn path and the flag drilled into the soil. This was targeted, she said. I know. She signed the documentation herself, added annotations, and attached his last 2 therapy summaries. Submit these with the injunction request, she said, and Calder, record the hearing, even if they protest, especially if they protest. By the time I got home, Bram was sitting at the foot of the path, shoes off, tiles untouched. He wasn't walking, just waiting. His fingers moved rhythmically over the loop of his weighted ring. It was how he regulated stillness, when motion was no longer safe. I sat beside him. When Marin was alive, we had a ritual. Every Friday, she and Bram would pick a new pattern for the path. Sunburst, wave, spiral. I would rebuild the tile layout while they watched. Bram didn't always respond then, but over time he began walking the shapes on his own, one step, then another. Eventually he wouldn't start the day without it. We didn't have many photographs, but we had that memory. And Melora wanted it paved over. That night, I opened the court system portal and uploaded everything. The medical letters, the audit from Aaron, the HOA notice, the destruction photos, and the time-stamped form from Stanton. I requested an emergency review with supporting legal precedents and cross-referenced 3 HUD settlements from the past 5 years. Then I printed a copy of everything. If they were going to force me to show up at that table again, I'd show up with enough weight to crush the foundation under them. I didn't sleep. At dawn, Bram came to my room and touched my wrist, then pointed to the porch. We stepped outside together. He walked, just once, just the inner loop, slow, deliberate. When he passed the section where the path had been torn, he hesitated, but didn't stop. He looked up at me, eyes unreadable, then took 2 more steps and completed the circuit. That was all the confirmation I needed. I went back inside, opened the filing folder again, and added one last note. Prepared to proceed. Later that afternoon, a message popped up on the community app, a boilerplate post from the HOA. Reminder, all members are expected to attend Friday's special compliance session. It is our shared duty to uphold the beauty and cohesion of Crestlock Vale. Cohesion. They always use that word when they meant submission. I checked the time. HUD hadn't responded yet. The injunction still sat in review. I couldn't stop the hearing, not yet. But I could bring truth into that room, force it to sit at the table with them, and maybe, just maybe, make them choke on it. Stanton didn't knock. He appeared on my porch Friday morning, 30 hours before the hearing, with a manila envelope tucked beneath his arm, and a look that told me something had shifted. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Bram was upstairs with his headphones, tracing the season's chart on his wall like clockwork. "She's rushing an emergency ratification," Stanton said without preamble, trying to backdate the Form 14-2A2F and submit it retroactively before anyone checks the timestamp. Can she pull that off? Not legally, but she's betting no one will notice if it's buried beneath HOA procedural filings. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a printout from the state's compliance database. It showed a new digital submission, Form 14-202F, uploaded just this morning, but right beside it, clear as day, the server timestamp read, filed 6:17 a.m. Friday. The certification deadline had passed over 500 days ago. I looked up. "You pulled this yourself?" "I still have access, for now." He hesitated. "There's more." He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a second item, a small leather-bound planner. He flipped it open to a page marked 2 months ago. She met with the Architectural Oversight Subcommittee without quorum, pushed through a proposal to retroactively sanction discretionary removals on non-compliant properties. No minutes filed, no resident notification. He tapped the entry. "This hearing was planned before she even sent your first violation notice." I felt my grip tighten on the envelope. "She targeted Bram's path, knowing it wasn't enforceable," I said quietly. Stanton nodded. "And she wanted it gone before anyone questioned her authority, before anyone had time to fight back." The wind kicked up between us, dry and cold. Stanton looked toward the path, toward the jagged edge where tiles no longer gleamed. "I have a daughter," he said after a while. "Naomi. She's older now, lives out west. But she had a sensory disorder growing up. I remember she used to cry every time they changed the fluorescent lights at school. People thought she was dramatic or spoiled." He looked at me then, the hardness behind his glasses finally cracking. "I've watched Melora destroy this community one violation at a time. I stayed quiet because it was easier, because she doesn't fight you head on. She builds a cage around you so slowly you forget what freedom looked like. Why tell me now?" He took a breath. "Because I saw your son flinch when she touched him, and I can't unsee it." We stood there a moment longer. Then he extended a flash drive. "It's everything," he said. "Meeting recordings, draft memos, bylaw edits she never filed. You'll want to back it up fast." I took it. No words felt sufficient. He turned to leave, but paused at the bottom of the steps. "She'll try to discredit me," he said without turning around. "Say I'm bitter, that I falsified the timeline. But you've got the time stamp now. That's what matters. Truth on paper." When he was gone, I went straight to my home office, copied the drive, archived it to cloud and offline backup. Then I printed the timestamp page and added it to my hearing folder right after Bram's therapy letters. Every piece was lining up now. The expired authority, the unlawful destruction, the premeditated targeting of a child with disabilities, and now the attempted cover-up. I knew Melora. She wouldn't back down. She'd double down, smile through it, dismiss Stanton as disgruntled, dismiss me as emotional, dismiss Bram as irrelevant. But paper doesn't lie. Timestamps don't edit themselves. She'd built her authority on the assumption that no one would question the frame. I was about to pull out every nail. By sunset, Bram was back on the path, walking the rebuilt arc I'd laid quietly that afternoon. It wasn't perfect. The gravel was uneven, some tiles were cracked, but the shape was intact. The rhythm returned. He walked it 3 times, then sat beside the swing and touched the new beam I'd installed. We didn't speak. We didn't need to, because tomorrow we weren't going to beg for dignity. We were going to demand accountability. I arrived at the hearing 15 minutes early. The Pinecrest Community Hall was colder than usual, the fluorescent lights flickering with that soft electrical hum that always made Bram squint. But he wasn't with me this time. I'd left him at home with Dr. Halverson, who had volunteered to sit with him. She said he needed safety more than symbolism. She was right. I set my folder down on the long plastic table, arranged in a horseshoe at the front of the room. Melora's seat was at the center, flanked by 3 other board members, all of whom wore that particular brand of HOA neutrality, polite smiles and eyes that flicked away from anything uncomfortable. Melora Reeve walked in 5 minutes later. She wore a blazer the color of old stone, her name badge pinned like a medal. She nodded to me as if we were old co-workers, not opponents. No acknowledgement of what she'd done, no remorse, no hesitation. "Dr. Wynne," she said smoothly, "thank you for attending. We appreciate your willingness to work through this process." I didn't answer. The hearing was called to order at the top of the hour. Melora's voice, calm and clipped, read from a prepared statement about unauthorized landscape modifications and emergency action to preserve topographical drainage. Integrity. She never once used Bram's name, never said child, just resident minor, like he was a zoning label. Then she opened the floor. I stood, unfolded the packet, and passed copies to each board member. HUD complaint summary, audit letter from Aaron, time-stamped state record, Dr. Halverson's new letter, and the photo of the destroyed path, printed at full bleed on heavy stock. Only Stanton looked directly at the photo. When I spoke, I kept my tone measured, precise. I stated the expired filing date, the lack of enforcement authority, the unauthorized destruction, the fabricated emergency clause, the premeditated targeting of a medical accommodation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Melora waited until I was done before smiling, thin, sharp, rehearsed. "We appreciate your concerns, Dr. Wynne. The board has since refiled the necessary documentation and is now fully compliant with state mandates. Our priority has always been community safety." She slid a stapled packet across the table, her new filing time-stamped from the day before, retroactive, hollow, and legally irrelevant. Then she turned to the board. "As this matter concerns an alleged violation and not a confirmed board failure, we'll now proceed to internal deliberation." That's when I spoke again. "I've submitted the timestamp data to the county recorder's office. Your filing missed the statutory deadline by 18 months. Your emergency clause was passed without quorum, and your enforcement actions during that period are all void." Melora didn't flinch. "That's not your jurisdiction to determine." "No," I said. "But it is HUD's and the civil courts." I turned toward the back of the room. A woman in a navy suit stood near the door, Yvonne, from the accessibility compliance team. She hadn't announced herself, but she was here, observing. Melora's eyes finally flicked, just once. She knew. I placed Stanton's signed affidavit last at the top of the folder. "I'll be submitting this record, along with the recorded audio of this meeting, to the investigator assigned to my case. I suggest the board pause enforcement actions until a ruling is issued." Melora leaned back slightly, her hands folding at her waist. "Well," she said softly, "that sounds like a threat." "No," I said. "It's a reminder. You've operated unchecked for years. That ends today." Silence settled over the table. Stanton shifted in his seat, Then slowly he reached forward and tapped his nameplate. "For the record," he said, his voice even, "I concur with Dr. Wynn's assessment. I believe this board acted outside its authority, and I support a pause in all enforcement actions related to this property until legal review is complete." He didn't look at Melora when he said it, but she looked at him. For the first time, her smile cracked. The meeting dissolved after that. No vote, no motion, no resolution. Just brittle silence as the papers shuffled and the board stood, retreating toward their own damage control. I didn't follow. I had what I came for. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves scuttled across the pavement like they were fleeing something. By the time I reached the car, I knew. The strategy was working. She wasn't in control anymore. By Sunday morning, the first cracks began to show. A new thread appeared on the Crestlock Vale community message board, posted anonymously but clearly written by someone close to the board. It read, "Concerned about recent leadership decisions. Are we being exposed to liability by overstepping enforcement limits? Where's the transparency?" It didn't name Melora. It didn't mention Bram, but it didn't need to. Anyone paying attention could trace the implication. Within 6 hours, 5 more comments appeared beneath it. Residents asking about the destroyed path, the sudden hearing, and the whisper that a federal investigation had been opened. By noon, someone had posted the time-stamped filing document. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. The truth was leaking on its own now. While the board scrambled to close the discussion, I used the time to finish what I'd started. I contacted a local advocacy group that specialized in accessibility law. They'd worked on settlement negotiations in HOA discrimination cases before. I submitted a full copy of the complaint file, and within the hour, they assigned me a liaison, someone who could coordinate directly with HUD investigators, the county legal team, and the state civil rights office. Next, I contacted Dr. Halverson again. We recorded a formal video statement, a clinical breakdown of how environmental instability disrupts Bram's cognitive function. She included case studies, cited federal precedents, and concluded with a direct summary of what Crestlock Vale's actions had caused: measurable developmental regression in a medically vulnerable child. I uploaded it to the evidence repository tied to my HUD case file. Then I prepared the community mailer. It was simple. 2 pages. Page 1, a letter explaining what had happened, what rights were violated, and how HOA overreach wasn't just a personal matter. It was a financial liability for every homeowner in the neighborhood. Page 2, a copy of the HUD complaint number and a link to a public information portal where residents could follow the case. I didn't use accusations. I used facts, time-stamped, documented, verifiable. By Tuesday, 47 households had received it. Melora tried to counter the flood with a polished statement posted through the HOA's email list. "We remain committed to aesthetic excellence and legal compliance. The board is reviewing recent events and will respond in accordance with our community charter." But no one cared about her tone anymore. The cracks had widened, and I was still setting the next stage. Wednesday, I restored the entire sensory path with updated construction. This time, I used a modular base recommended by a licensed ADA accessible landscape consultant. I upgraded the edge beams to composite rubber and added solar lighting around each mirror tile. The whole process took 12 hours. I didn't file a permit. I didn't ask. That evening, 2 families walked by, parents I didn't know well. One mother paused and looked at the trail. Her daughter, maybe 7 or 8, broke from her side and ran her hand along the mirrored surface. "She's sensory-seeking too," the mother said. "We've never had anything like this here." I nodded once. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. The next morning, I found a folded note taped to my door. "We're sorry we didn't say something earlier. We thought we were the only ones. Thank you for not folding." The Winslows, Lot 39. There were more after that. Quiet notes, knocks on the door with silent nods. Stanton left one too. No words, just a copy of the board's internal message to members marked private, warning about unauthorized discussions and resident misinformation. He'd printed it and circled the timestamp in red. They were spinning, grasping for order. But the foundation was gone. I stood in the yard just after sunset, looking at the completed path. Bram walked it behind me, slow and steady, one hand brushing the lights as they flicked on. The HOA could hold all the meetings it wanted, but the neighborhood had already decided. The silence was ending, and the path was here to stay. The room was full before the hearing even started. This wasn't like the others. No folding tables and quiet rows. This one had a podium, a waiting list for speakers, and a local news crew standing in the back, their camera turned on, red light blinking. The board had tried to downplay the meeting as a general HOA update, but the flyer printed by residents told the truth. Crestlock Emergency Town Review, discussion of unlawful enforcement and leadership overreach. I took my seat near the front, folder balanced on my knee, Stanton beside me. He looked 10 years older than he had last week, like something had been draining him slowly and was finally ready to let go. He held his own folder, marked and tabbed, the affidavit on top. Melora entered late. She wore the same blazer, same badge, same half smile, but something in her walk had changed, less sure, more rehearsed. She moved like someone walking a floor they could no longer trust to hold. The board sat together behind a long elevated desk. The mic squealed once, and then the meeting was called to order. A woman from the community stood to open public comment. We have 17 residents signed up to speak. Please keep your remarks to 3 minutes. The first was a retired teacher. She spoke about Melora's fines for repainting her porch with a slightly off-tone brown. The second, a man. In his 40s, talked about a denied request to build a wheelchair ramp for his father. One by one, the stories came. Each one sounded different, but every single one echoed the same thing: control without care. When it was my turn, I walked to the mic without notes. My name is Dr. Calder Wynn. I'm a homeowner on Lot 17. My 6-year-old son, Bram, is nonverbal autistic. The path I built for him wasn't decorative. It was medically prescribed. I paused. Last month, the Crestlock Vale HOA destroyed part of that path without notice, citing emergency terrain policy, a policy passed without quorum during a time when the board's enforcement authority had lapsed. I lifted the folder and held it up. I have time-stamped evidence showing the HOA's annual compliance renewal was missed by 18 months. Every enforcement action during that time, every fine, every denial, every hearing, was issued without legal standing. I saw her shift then. Melora. Her fingers tapped once against her clipboard. Her eyes remained fixed on the back wall. Further, I continued, I have video evidence, witness statements, and medical documentation detailing the damage this board's actions caused to a legally protected disabled child. I've filed formal complaints with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the State Civil Rights Office, and the County Recorder's Office. I placed the folder on the podium. All of it is here, and all of it is public record now. Then I stepped back. I didn't need 3 minutes, because the truth didn't take long to land when you dropped it from height. When the last speaker sat down, the moderator turned to the board. Melora leaned toward the mic, but Stanton was faster. I'd like to make a motion, he said, voice clear. Melora's lips parted, but he continued. I move that the board initiate an immediate suspension of all enforcement actions issued after the compliance lapse, pending legal review. I further move that President Melora Reeve recuse herself from any matters involving resident medical accommodations or current investigations. Silence. Then a second voice. Seconded. Another. Third. It moved faster than anyone expected. Melora tried to speak, but the moderator cut her off. We have a motion and a majority second. The vote proceeds. 5 hands went up. 1 stayed down. Hers. The vote passed. The room didn't cheer. There was no eruption. Just a long, quiet exhale, like something heavy had been lifted, slowly, carefully, from every shoulder in the room. Melora stood and walked out without a word. The news crew followed her into the hallway. Stanton didn't say anything either. He just looked at me once, nodded, and turned toward the exit. I stayed until the room emptied. Then I picked up the folder, slid the affidavit back inside, and walked out into the night. The wind was colder now, but it didn't bite the same way. They didn't. Call it a resignation. The official notice posted to the HOA's online portal the next morning used careful language. Voluntary administrative withdrawal from active board leadership pending procedural realignment. But everyone knew what it meant. Melora Reeve was gone. No press release, no farewell message. Just a silent removal of her name from the president's line on the HOA directory. The same day the board quietly updated the enforcement logs, adding a note beside Bram's file. Medical accommodation, status, protected. I didn't celebrate. I stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, staring at the screen, while Bram sat on the floor behind me, stacking his memory tiles. He hadn't asked to walk the path yet, but his patterns were coming back. The tiles were sorted again. The loops had returned to order. Outside, the sunlight caught on the newly replaced section of trail, bouncing off the mirror tiles in a soft, unbroken arc. No flag, no warnings, no one watching. From the sidewalk, just stillness, just hours. That afternoon, a letter came in the mail, hand-addressed, formal. From the State Department of Civil Rights. It confirmed receipt of our full file, acknowledged the HUD coordination, and advised me that the investigation had reached formal inquiry stage. They would be conducting interviews, reviewing time-stamped records, and assessing the HOA's long-term compliance failures. If found responsible, the board could face not just policy correction, but civil penalties and federal oversight. It wasn't vindication, not yet, but it was real, and it was moving forward. I took the letter upstairs and added it to the folder, then sat with Bram by his bookshelf. He handed me a card with a snowflake on it. Winter, his favorite season. I turned the card over and traced the embossed ridges with his finger, slow and quiet. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. Later, I went for a walk through the neighborhood. It was different now. More eyes met. Mine. People nodded. Some stopped to talk. A man from 2 streets over told me he'd received the same violation letter about a ramp for his wife 2 years ago. A woman from Lot 23 said she'd signed a petition circulating now, calling for a full board re-election. Some of them apologized. Most just said, thank you. But I wasn't the one they needed to thank. Bram had been the center of this. His silence had been the loudest truth in the room. His steadiness had become the line in the sand that finally held. I passed the community trail and spotted Stanton sitting alone on the bench near the lake. I almost kept walking, then I stopped. He looked up, nodded. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he said, "They're reviewing the rest of the board now. The subcommittee records I turned over. It's going to trigger a full audit." "Good." He ran a hand over his face. "I'm not proud of what I let happen, but I'm glad something finally broke it. Open." I looked out over the water. The wind skimmed the surface, soft and cold. "You helped more than you think," I said. "And there's more coming." He nodded slowly. Then he stood. "Take care of him," he said. "He's stronger than any of us ever gave him credit for. He always has been." He walked away without another word. That night, I stood at the edge of the path as Bram walked it again. One step at a time, circling the pattern with quiet focus. The lights along the edge lit up in sequence, gentle, warm, steady. He paused halfway through and looked up at me. Then he reached out and touched the new tile, the one we'd placed together after the hearing. His hand stayed there for a long moment. And for the first time in days, he smiled. The path was whole again. Not just on the ground, but in him, and in me. I stood there in the dark, watching him walk. And I realized something I hadn't let myself feel until then. It was over. Not everything. Not the world, but the fight. This fight. We had made it through. And the silence, that awful imposed silence, had been broken for good. The morning after the board updated Bram's file, I woke to a quiet house. Not the brittle quiet of uncertainty, but a soft, grounded calm. Bram was already downstairs, standing by the back door with his headphones on, waiting. He wanted to walk the path. I opened the door, and he stepped out into the cool air, bare feet touching the first mirror tile, as if greeting an old friend. The sun was still low, casting warm reflections across the yard. The rebuilt curve glimmered, every edge aligned, every piece finally where it belonged. He walked the loop once, then twice. His steps were slower than usual, like he was taking inventory, confirming that the world had steadied beneath him. When he reached the section they had destroyed, he paused, touched the new tile with 2 fingers, and moved on. No flinch this time, no hesitation, just continuation. I stood in the doorway, feeling an ache rise in my chest, the kind that comes after too much holding your breath. Because the truth was simple. The path wasn't just a therapeutic structure. It wasn't just his safe routine. It was the last piece of Marin's vision for him, the one thing she made me promise to protect. And for a while, I wasn't sure I could. But here he was, walking through the morning light with the ease she dreamed he'd one day feel. And here I was, watching him reclaim what had been taken. Around noon, an email from the state civil rights office arrived. It confirmed that Crestlock Vale's HOA had been placed under provisional oversight, pending completion of a full compliance audit. Enforcement powers suspended. All actions during their lapse nullified. A formal advisory ordered. Then, at the bottom of the notice, one line stood out. You have been identified as the primary complainant whose documentation initiated corrective supervision. I hadn't expected the words to hit me as hard as they did, not because I wanted credit, but because it meant the system had listened and responded. Later that afternoon, a group of neighbors gathered at the end of my driveway. People I'd seen around but never spoken to in any meaningful way. A retiree who'd fought the board over a garden box. A single father whose request for a disability parking space near his unit was denied. A young couple fined for installing outdoor lights after their newborn arrived. They didn't come to thank me. They came because something had unlocked in them, the sense that silence wasn't their only option anymore. One woman held a clipboard. We're organizing signatures, she said. Full board re-election, new bylaws, transparency requirements. I signed the petition without a word. They stayed a while, talked, shared quiet stories of frustration and humiliation. Stanton arrived near the end, hands in his pockets, face drawn, but lighter somehow. When our eyes met, he gave a short nod, the kind that says everything without demanding anything. As evening settled, I walked the path again with Bram. The solar lights blinked on, one by one, golden against the deepening blue. The rhythm of his footsteps fell into sync with my own. He touched my hand once as we walked, just once. But it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. Understanding, trust, safety restored. At the far end of the loop, he stepped off the path and sat in the grass, looking up at the first stars nudging through the sky. I sat beside him, letting the quiet stretch between us. For the first time since all of this began, I let myself feel the full truth. We had won. Not because someone else lost, but because Bram didn't have to. He didn't have to lose ground, lose progress, lose the one place where the world finally made sense to him. I looked at the path, our path, and realized it would stand long after this conflict was forgotten by everyone else, because we rebuilt it in the open, we fought for it in the open, and now he walked it without fear. If you want more stories of families standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now. Share your story in the comments, and let me know what fight you refuse to lose.